Have you ever been betrayed by the people you love most? That's exactly what happened to me. 10 minutes after I wired my entire house down payment to my father. He said it was for an old debt tied to a loan taken in my name over a decade ago. But the truth? There was no lien, no collections, just a lie, disguised as a crisis. I'm a forensic accountant. Numbers are my second language. So when I traced the funds and uncovered a shell company registered under his name, everything I believed about trust and family started to fracture. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through how I uncovered the truth, reclaimed the property they tried to hide, and did it all without raising my voice. Their rent now comes to me on the first of every month, not out of revenge, but because silence isn't safety. And love without respect? That's just leverage. If you've ever been the responsible one in your family, this story might change how you define loyalty forever. Don't click away. What happens next? No one saw coming. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way I can send you a special shout out. Now, let's begin our story together. I had been nursing my leftover eggplant stir fry when the message arrived, bright as a sunrise in the corner of my screen. Congratulations, Emily Tran. Your home loan has been pre-approved. 10 years of side gigs, coupon dinners, and saying no to every impulse were suddenly worth more than the number on a statement. I cracked the kitchen window and let the scent of blooming cherry trees drift in. Somewhere outside, a lawn mower droned, steady and hopeful. I allowed myself the smallest celebration, one soft laugh, a single breath of relief before forwarding the approval to my realtor. Mom called before the skillet cooled. Your father and I are making fajo tonight, she said. We want to toast your big step. Her voice carried its usual sweetness, the kind you do not question. I promised to be there by 6. Traffic along the 22nd was forgiving, and spring lights still lingered when I turned onto their street. Dad was at the grill, coaxing chicken skewers to caramel perfection. Mom met me at the door with a smile that felt half a degree warmer than room temperature. Aunt May waved from the patio, a crossword folded on her lap, eyes sharp behind readers. Dinner smelled like childhood, star anise, basil, a hint of ginger that clung to my sleeves. We clinked iced tea instead of wine, because Dad said clear heads made for clear blessings. Conversation meandered, interest rates, garden weeds, and how many miles I had put on my Corolla. Then Dad cleared his throat the way he did when the thermostat needed adjusting and no one else would do it. There's something we should talk about before you sign anything official, he began. Mom slid a manila envelope onto the table. Old business, she added, almost apologetic. You remember the loan we took in your name when Uncle Vin was sick? I frowned at the envelope. 12 years ago, I thought that was settled. Dad shook his head. We never finished the paperwork. The lender is calling it due, and if it is not paid, it could show up during your closing. His chopsticks tapped the bowl, a tiny metronome of urgency. I opened the envelope. Inside lay a single page, letterhead crooked, dates blurry, as if copied one too many times. It spoke of default, accrued fees, and imminent collections. My mortgage officer's cautions echoed in my mind. Any blemish can derail approval. Mom touched my wrist. We would never ask if we had another choice, she whispered. You have always been our responsible one. Responsible. The word fit like an old coat. Comfortable, heavy, impossible to take off. I looked at the broth film cooling on the surface of my bowl. Dad's gaze was steady, but his fingers worried the edge of his napkin. Aunt May watched, lips a flat line. How much? I asked, though the figure was already forming, cruelly precise. 184, Dad said, rounding as if it might soften the blow. Pay it, and the lien disappears before the bank looks. A wind chime rattled outside, delicate and tinny. Mom refilled my water glass, though it was still full. Family helps family, she murmured. "We helped you get here. Now we need you to help us stay here." I felt the old tug, guilt braided with gratitude. There is a line in my mother tongue that says a tree's branches can never leave its roots behind. I told myself this was merely watering the soil. An hour later, I sat at the desktop in Dad's study, routing my hard-earned down payment to an account number he provided. The confirmation flashed green. Done. I waited for the rush of relief that usually follows problem solving. Instead, the room seemed to shrink. The house smelled suddenly of wet star anise and extinguished candles. When I returned to the table, the soup was lukewarm. No one raised a spoon. Dad closed the laptop. Mom gathered bowls. The celebration I had imagined, laughter, maybe a toast, had already slipped out the back door. Sweet rice pudding appeared, but only Aunt May took a bite. Halfway through, she set down her spoon and folded her napkin with careful precision. A silent kindness for something that had already broken. Dad thanked me in a voice meant for boardrooms. Mom patted my shoulder, eyes shining with something too cloudy to name. I stood to leave. My new shoes, bought on clearance but still stiff, waited by the mat. I slipped them on, the leather protesting the sudden weight. At the threshold, Aunt May touched my elbow. Her perfume was faint, jasmine mixed with library dust. She leaned close, voice no louder than the chime outside. "Honey," she said, "don't sign anything else until you talk to me." I opened my mouth, but whatever words I had rehearsed dried up against the back of my teeth. Instead, I nodded once, the motion small but certain, as if tipping a scale I had never realized was off balance. Outside, the evening air felt cooler than when I arrived. I pressed the car key and the headlights blinked awake, bright and indifferent. Behind me, the house swallowed its porch light until only a dim rectangle remained, like a polite farewell that did not quite reach the curb. I left my parents' driveway feeling stripped of something I could not yet name. By the time I reached my condo, the sun was slipping behind the palms, washing the sky in a color too soft for how hard my thoughts had become. I dropped my purse on the entry bench, lowered the blinds, and let the hum of the refrigerator settle over the room like white noise. The debt letter lay on the counter where I had tossed it that morning, its off-center logo glaring now that I knew where to look. Years ago, I kept every family grocery receipt in an Excel sheet, color-coded by date, category, and payer. One Friday, I noticed Dad had slipped the same carton of eggs onto 2 separate reimbursements. I laughed, sure it was a copy-paste error. He shrugged, said he had earned it. The spreadsheet stayed, but the joke never landed again. I reopened the letter, this time as a forensic accountant instead of a dutiful daughter. The font on the heading was Times New Roman. The footer used Garamond. No legitimate lender mixes fonts. The notary seal looked scanned, not embossed, and the date field was left aligned while everything else was justified. Little seams in a costume meant to hold up under candlelight, never sunlight. The county recorder's website loaded slowly, each page a reminder that most truths hide in plain bureaucratic daylight. I searched my name, nothing. I searched my address, still nothing. No liens, no judgments, no pending suits. My heartbeat slowed, not with calm, but with purpose. My phone lit up. Aunt May's name appeared, the screen blooming gentle blue. I answered on speaker. "Emily, dear, just checking." Her tone was careful, as if each word had to pass a safety inspection. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not yet," I said, sliding documents into a neat pile. "Did you know about that loan?" Silence, then a sigh. I knew they were worried about money, but paperwork? Number, if you want real answers, start where records live, not where rumors do. Public records, of course. She didn't have to say more. Aunt May never placed ladders. She simply pointed to where the wall began. After we hung up, I opened a new browser tab and keyed in, Orange County Fictitious Business Search. 10 minutes later, a name flickered on screen. Sunrise Shelter, LLC, Managing Officer, Roger T. Tran. My stomach clenched. Dad hated mornings. Why name a company after dawn unless you plan to keep it hidden in daylight's glare? I needed a second set of eyes bound by confidentiality clauses. Theo answered on the second ring, his voice steady as always. Thought you were closing on a house, Em. Plans changed, I said. Can you trace a trust account for me? It's urgent, but delicate. He didn't ask more. Our work had taught us that explanations often contaminated evidence. I sent the routing and account numbers. 2 cups of lukewarm tea later, his reply came, money had moved from my transfer into Sunrise Shelter LLC within 30 minutes, then into an escrow tied to a 4-unit building on Orangewood Avenue, the same building my parents rented. My chair didn't squeal when I stood. The rubber feet made sure of that. But the silence that followed roared. This wasn't repayment of a debt. It was rerouting, shuffling my dream into their pockets to keep the illusion of need alive. Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next, but before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. I printed every receipt, the wire confirmation, the Shell Corporation filing, the escrow statement, the printer word, each sheet sliding out like a verdict. I opened a blank spreadsheet, old habits, and logged timestamps, amounts, entity names. My hands trembled, yet my eyes remained dry. Tears felt too light for the weight of this discovery. Outside, a group of kids wove their bikes along the cul-de-sac, tire spokes clicking, laughter skipping over pavement. Life, unrehearsed and forgiving, went on beyond my drawn blinds. Inside, I cataloged deceit in Arial 11. One line of thought came uninvited. Love without honesty is only leverage in nicer clothes. I paused, letting that truth land. Mom's words, remember who helped you get here, echoed, suddenly hollow. Help is a gift. Obligation wears the same face but asks for interest. The printer spat the final page. I stacked the documents, slid them into a charcoal folder, and placed it beside my laptop like a patient file awaiting surgery. The room felt colder, even though the thermostat held steady. I realized I had not taken a real breath in minutes. When I finally did, it tasted of laser toner in late spring dusk, a mix of synthetic and fleeting. My phone pinged. Theo again. You should see this. They've owned that building for years, but now it's up for sale. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, casting my reflection over the text. In the glass, I looked older, lines sharper, as if truth itself had chiseled them. I tapped the phone awake, screen bright once more, and took a steady breath. Send me everything, I replied. Tonight. The cursor blinked, waiting. Outside, the last bike bell rang and the daylight slipped out of reach. Paths change, I thought, but footprints stay, especially when they're stamped in ink and numbers. The folder on my desk felt heavier than its paper suggested, as if absorbing the gravity of what came next. I switched off the kitchen light, leaving only the glow of the monitor to keep watch, while the printer cooled and the truth, at last, warmed its hands. The heat settled early that July morning, thick as a quilt no one asked for. I left the ceiling fan spinning and drove downtown, windows cracked, letting the freeway wind slap my focus awake. The Orange County Record Office was already humming when I arrived. Old fluorescents, older carpet, and that unmistakable mixture of copier toner and sun-baked paper. I gave my name, slid my request across the counter, and waited while a clerk with cinnamon-colored glasses searched the archive. She returned holding a manila folder like a delicate casserole. 4-unit property, she said, tapping the label. Deed history goes back 30 years. Need copies? Please, I answered. She didn't ask why. Maybe she'd witnessed enough family tangles to know discretion was part of the service. While the copier clicked, I glanced down the hallway where rows of microfilm machines whispered bygone secrets. At 17, I'd stood in a similar building, helping Dad reconcile rent ledgers he claimed belonged to his boss. That summer, I thought I was learning business. I was really absorbing sleight of hand. Back home, Theo's spreadsheet waited in my inbox. Dates, mortgage balances, a note that the building was slipping toward foreclosure because a balloon payment had burst. I stared at the numbers. Dad's Sunrise Shelter LLC owned the property. Sunrise Shelter was drowning, and my wire transfer had not plugged the leak. It had only bought them time to stay underwater. I opened another file. My own shell, Emberlight Ventures, established 6 months earlier for tax efficiency on freelance audits. Emberlight had no history, no drama, just the anonymity I now needed. Within an hour, I drafted a purchase offer, earnest money wired from accounts untouched by family fingerprints, inspection waived, quick close. The price felt almost merciful for a distressed asset, but mercy wasn't the motive. Silence was. If I moved fast, no neighbor gossip, no lawyer chatter would float back to my parents before the ink dried. My realtor, Vanessa, met me at a cafe to finalize the packet. She skimmed the pages, eyebrow arched. "You sure about the waiver? Roof looks ancient." "Positive," I replied. "I'm not afraid of old shingles." Vanessa shrugged, professional neutrality intact, and forwarded everything to the bank's receiver. She didn't ask why the LLC address traced back to a P.O. box in Irvine or why the buyer insisted on remaining off-record until closing. In California real estate, motivation is negotiable. Cash is convincing. 2 weeks crawled past, days of muggy skies and short tempers on the evening news, while escrow lumbered forward. I filled the waiting with routine. Client audits, frozen berry smoothies, nighttime jogs through the condo complex. Each mile tamped down the echo of Mom's voice praising my reliability, even as she emptied my account. Some nights I looped onto Orangewood Avenue and walked the block where the fourplex squatted behind hedges grown too tall. The porch lights flicked on at dusk, including the one outside Unit 3 where my parents lived. Through sheer curtains I could see Dad's silhouette, shoulders curved over a television glow. It felt like ringing the bell of a house I already owned but hadn't yet acknowledged. The closing date fell on a Wednesday, unremarkable except for the thunderheads clustering inland. I signed the packet alone at my dining table, digital signatures pulsing blue, each click a soft thud of finality. When the last confirmation popped up, a breeze nudged the blinds, rattling them like applause no one else could hear. Emberlight Ventures now held title to the building. Sunrise Shelter was released, its debts erased by the purchase price. My parents remained tenants, their lease undisturbed. Nothing changed to the naked eye, yet everything rearranged beneath the floorboards. I didn't rush to tell Aunt May or Theo. Power felt safer quiet. That evening I parked across from the fourplex again, engine off, windows down. Cicadas droned, sprinklers hissed somewhere out of sight. Mom's kitchen light glowed yellow against the dusk. I remembered the time she'd scolded me for spending $50 on a used textbook, saying ownership was overrated so long as the library existed. I believed her then. Tonight I thought of how property holds stories the way skin holds scars. Some lines stay even when they're covered. A text buzzed, snapping me back. Vanessa. Recording confirmed. Congrats, landlord. The word felt foreign but steadying. I drove home, passing rows of tidy stucco houses, each promising a version of permanence. Inside my condo, the AC unit labored against the evening warmth. I set the deed packet in the same drawer that held my canceled down payment check, 2 documents that now belonged to the same strange chapter. The digital clock blinked 10:12 when the banking app chimed. A new deposit, $1,895. Description, Unit 3, monthly rent. For a moment I simply stared, the digits sharp as gravel under bare feet. Dad's money, part of it once mine, now cycled back through a system he didn't know I controlled. I closed the app, exhaled through pursed lips, and let the room settle. This wasn't revenge. Revenge wants an audience. Restoration only asks for balance. Still, balance carries its own quiet weight. The ceiling fan ticked above, circling warm air like a secret told in confidence. In the hush, I allowed myself one thought, neither triumphant nor bitter, just steady. If they could rewrite the rules, So could I, and I had finally finished my revision. The first thing I noticed when I stepped onto my parents' porch was the silence. Even the wind had taken the afternoon off, leaving the air heavy and still. Inside, the familiar sense of steamed rice and lemongrass chicken drifted through rooms I could have navigated blindfolded, yet everything felt half a degree colder, as if the house had taken sides. Dad greeted me with a practiced smile, the kind he used at church potlucks. Mom fussed over a platter of sliced mango, sugary juice pooling at the edges. Aunt May hovered near the doorway, her arms crossed lightly, eyes tracking every small movement. No one mentioned the July heat or the price of gas or the Dodgers' chances. Polite weather talk had nowhere to stand. We sat. The table gleamed, set with bowls I recognized from childhood birthdays, but conversation tiptoed around us. Mom asked whether my office had reinstated casual Fridays. Dad nodded at each answer as though moderating a deposition. The hum of the ceiling fan marked time, steady, impartial. When the chicken bones on Dad's plate lay picked clean, I reached into my tote and laid 3 folders on the table. The room inhaled. "I brought some paperwork," I said, my voice steady enough to surprise me. "Thought we could clarify the loan." Dad's gaze sharpened, but his smile stayed. "Emily, today was supposed to be a celebration." "Clarity is worth celebrating," I replied, opening the first folder. Bank transfers, routing numbers, the path of my $184,000 spreading like tributaries on a flood map. Mom's hand found her napkin. She folded it once, twice. "We didn't want to worry you with details," she murmured. I turned the second folder. "Sunrise Shelter, LLC," I read aloud, sliding the printout beside Dad's plate. "Registered agent, Roger Tran. Same LLC that received my transfer." Dad's jaw flexed. "Business gets complicated, Em. Sometimes we have to move funds to protect the family." A small clink echoed where Aunt May set her fork down. She did not speak, but she tilted my teacup closer, a quiet endorsement. I opened the final folder, deed history, foreclosure notices, proof the building was in free fall before my money propped it up. "You told me a lender would block my mortgage," I said, meeting Mom's eyes. "There was no lender, there was only you." Dad's polite tone cracked. "You always thought you were above us, auditing everyone's life with your fancy spreadsheets." Mom dabbed at tears that didn't spill. "We had no choice," she whispered. "Family first." My heartbeat was audible now, but my voice stayed level. "You didn't ask, you decided. That's the difference between need and theft." The words landed with the same dull weight as a locking door. Silence widened. The fan blades circled, pushing heat that no longer mattered. Dad's fingers drummed once, then stopped. Mom's shoulders slumped, the space between us filling with the rustle of mango skins drying on porcelain. No one apologized. No one shouted. We simply sat with the evidence, an uninvited guest who refused to leave. I gathered the folders, careful not to hurry. In the hallway, Aunt May caught my wrist. Her grip was soft but unshakable, like cloth bound twice around a package. She didn't speak. She only nodded, the smallest bow of solidarity. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the oleander hedge. I exhaled, letting stale tension escape my lungs, and started the car. Gravel crunched under the tires, a sound too loud for a neighborhood drowning in hush. Halfway home, my phone vibrated on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen at the next light. One notification from the property app. Rent processed. Late fee applied. A quiet pulse of resolve moved through me. The balance was shifting, silently, firmly, just as Dad once taught me. When you can't pay in money, pay in silence. I had learned the lesson. I was simply returning it with interest. Control does not always arrive in a briefcase or bang a gavel. Sometimes it shows up in a plastic sleeve tacked to a bulletin board, typed in 12-point font. On the first cool morning of October, our property manager slid new leases under every door in the fourplex. The courtyard smelled of drying leaves and the faint starch of warm laundry. A few neighbors glanced at the notice, shrugged, and stuffed it into pockets. I waited until the hallway cleared before I stepped out and read my own version. Late fees assessed after the 5th. Direct deposit only. Ownership entity, Ember Light Ventures. A small signature, mine, sat at the bottom. I imagined Dad's reaction when he reached that line, the way his brow would pinch, trying to place a name he was certain he had never heard. That was the point. Soft power, my college professor had called it. Empires do not always fall to gunfire. Sometimes they dissolve when the ledgers change hands. 2 days later, I parked across the street from the building with a bag of groceries balanced on the passenger seat. Steam rose from roof vents as dryers churned. Dad was wrestling a trash bin to the curb, muttering about rising fees, the wheels squeaking protest down the driveway. Mom waved from the porch, cardigan buttoned against the crisp air. Inside their kitchen, the overhead light flickered, casting thin shadows on the linoleum. I placed apples and a loaf of rye bread on the counter. Dad rubbed his temples. "Have you ever heard of Ember Light Ventures?" he asked, jaw tight. "I can't say I have," I replied, which was true in a way that mattered only to me. He handed me the new lease. "Late fees after 5 days," he read, voice climbing. "We pay on the 6th because that's when Social Security hits. Now they want a penalty for being 1 day late." Mom poured tea in slow circles. "Rent is going up too. These corporate landlords bleed people." I sliced an apple, listened to the knife click against the board. "Did you try calling the office?" Dad snorted. "They hide behind voicemail trees. No real person." He tossed the lease on the table, paper skidding to a stop beside the sugar bowl. "They could at least meet us halfway." Mom touched his arm. "Maybe they will if we explain." I placed apple slices in a bowl and pushed it forward. "Worth asking," I said. Their frustration filled the room like steam off hot broth, but it never crossed the line into questions I could not parry. When Mom hugged me goodbye, she held on a second longer than usual, as though trying to anchor herself in calmer water. That night, Aunt May called. Her voice was low, the hush of someone speaking in a room with thin walls. "I saw the county filing," she said. "You own it." "Technically, Emberlight does," I answered. She paused, letting the distinction settle. "You did not do it to hurt them." "I did it to stop the bleeding," I said. "Mine and theirs." Her exhale sounded like relief and worry braided together. "Just remember, quiet leverage can still bruise if you lean too hard." "I know." Rent was due on the 1st. My banking app stayed silent until the evening of the 5th, when 3 of 4 tenants paid. The missing deposit was predictable. Dad had never conceded to deadlines he disliked. At midnight, the system applied a $50 penalty and generated an automated notice. The language was polite, the consequences clear. I had written every word. The next afternoon, the property manager, Mr. Delaney, forwarded a voicemail. Dad's voice spilled through the speaker, rough with disbelief. "We have always paid," he insisted. "1 extra day and you fine us like strangers." Delaney's only comment in the email was a single line. "Please advise." I replied, "Keep policy consistent. No exceptions." 2 hours later, my phone rang again. Mom's number. I let it roll to voicemail, heart thudding harder than I expected. Her message arrived 30 seconds later, a fragile recording wrapped in static. "Emily, we need to talk, please." She did not mention rent or penalties, just the plea twice. Like knocking on a locked door, she suddenly realized she had no key to. I replayed the message once, then placed the phone face down on the coffee table. Outside, the courtyard trees shook off another handful of leaves. They drifted past the windows, gold and weightless, landing where they pleased. The notice board in the hallway fluttered as a draft passed, the plastic sleeves rustling with soft authority. Empires fall quietly, I thought, and sometimes they rise the same way. One signature, one invoice, one late fee at a time. Snow had drifted across Main Street overnight, only to melt into slush by noon, leaving little white islands along the curb. I parked across from Willow Cafe, the place Mom once swore brewed the world's gentlest tea, and watched my breath mist the windshield. Cinnamon air escaped every time someone opened the door, carrying a warmth the season hadn't yet earned. Inside, the lights were soft, the tables small, and the music polite enough to forget. Dad was already seated, posture straight as a hymn. Mom stirred something in her mug, eyes fixed on the tiny whirlpool. They looked up together when I approached, relief flickering like a porch bulb in wind. "Emily," Mom said, forcing a smile, "thank you for meeting." I took the chair opposite them. The table between us felt narrower than our silence. Dad cleared his throat. "We're sorry things became so complicated," he began. "None of this was meant to hurt you." Mom nodded too eagerly. "We were trying to hold everything together. Families get messy, but we're still family, right?" Their words hovered, soft-edged and incomplete, leaning on the kind of forgiveness that arrives before accountability. I unlatched my leather folder and slid a packet forward. The crisp pages stopped against Dad's cup with a quiet thud. "That's the recorded transfer," I said. "Emberlight Ventures, me, became the building's owner 3 months ago." Dad's fingers twitched, but he kept them in his lap. Mom lifted the cover sheet, lips moving as she read. Their practiced sorrow wavered, replaced by the dull confusion of a magician upstaged by her own trick. "You bought it?" Dad whispered. "I rescued it," I replied. "Default would have taken it anyway. This way, no sheriff's notice, no eviction, just a different name on the tax bill." Mom's eyes shone glassy. "So all those late fees, that was you?" "I enforced the lease you signed," I said. Nothing more. Dad exhaled, a sound like air escaping a tire. "You could have spoken to us." "I did," I reminded him. "But talking only counted when you needed my money, not my perspective." He closed the folder, sliding it back as if distance might soften its fact. "Emily, we raised you. We sacrificed." I met his gaze. "Love that demands silence is leverage, not care. You didn't lose me because you needed help. You lost me because you never thought I'd notice." Mom reached for my hand, stopped halfway. "What happens now?" "You stay if you wish," I said, voice steady. "Same rent, same rules. Pay on time and nothing changes. Consider it a new kind of family discount. Respect." Dad's shoulders sagged. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, the words refusing to leave their former shapes. Mom's spoon clinked the cup once, twice. No one chased the sound. I stood. "The lease renewal is in the packet. Sign it and return to Mr. Delaney." I gathered my coat. "Take your time deciding. I won't chase an answer." Mom's chin trembled, but no tears fell. Dad stared at a smear of steam on his glasses, as though clarity waited on the lens. I stepped toward the door, each footfall lighter than it had any right to be. Snowflakes fluttered past the window, brief and undecided. Outside, cold air pinched my cheeks, but my lungs filled without resistance. I walked to the car feeling neither triumph nor grief, only a spacious quiet where obligation used to sit. At the first red light, my phone vibrated. Aunt May's text glowed against the dashboard shadows. "Proud of you. They'll never forget this, but you can finally forget them." A smile tugged, small and real. I typed back, "Peace and distance, like you said." The light turned green. I eased onto the avenue, tires crunching soft ice. Ahead, the street arched toward the river, bare trees tracing lines against a pale sky. I thought of homes, those we buy, those we rent, those we outgrow. I thought of locks and how some open, inward, some outward, and some are changed entirely when the person inside decides she deserves a key made only for her. The cafe roof slipped from view in the rear mirror. Snow began again, fine as sifted sugar, erasing tire marks almost as soon as they formed. I didn't speed up to outrun the storm. I simply drove through it, steady hands on the wheel, the road widening with every mile I chose not to look back. Sometimes the hardest peace to earn is the one that asks nothing in return, not even forgiveness. I didn't walk away angry. I walked away free. In life, love without respect becomes a burden, not a bond. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors that close quietly behind you, reminding you that healing isn't loud. It's a choice. If this story touched something in you, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your own journey, or simply let this one sit with you for a while. And if this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about resilience and hope. Thanks for watching.